everyone, Cherie here. Today I've been creating some filler cards for my December album. So what I thought I'd do is run through each card. Most of them are finished except for one in this little set. I've been using the Joy stamp set, which came in the Joy kit with Felicity Jane this year, and this set is also available separately in the store. So I've used lots of these stamps on my filler cards. This is the first set, and I do have a second set to show you as well, which is all greens and golds, but this first set all about red, white and black. So I thought I'd just run through each card with you to just briefly explain what I did for each card, and then I'm going to finish off this last card with a little tree which I'm going to emboss with gold, and I'll show you how I do that. Okay, so the first card was simply the little date stamp, which says December. I've got a little strip of the red polka dot paper there, and these little row of reindeer were one of the branding strips on one of the pieces of paper, and I've just run a line of stitching. And when I'm ready to put this into my album, I will stamp the number of the date, for the date, with some black ink into that little square there. So that's the first card, and all my journaling will be added to that later as well, obviously. The second card was actually one of the journaling cards in the kit, and all I've done is add a row of stitching along that line there. You can see it there. I've stamped Be Merry in black onto some scrap white cardstock and just cut little fishtails on either side of that and added a flare there as well. And I just attached that flare with a glue dot, and that holds it really nicely. So the third card I've got here, I had a strip of the diagonal stripe paper across the bottom with some stitching, and then I've stamped December Tradition from the stamp set in red and black, and then added that little tree flare there with another glue dot. Very cute, those flare. Okay, this one here I've simply stamped holiday details across the top there, and along the bottom, sorry I'm just getting that to focus, along the bottom I've got some of the polka dot paper with a little bit of zigzag stitching, and then I've just added one of those little metal star paper clips on the top there, and they're available in the Felicity Jane store as well. Okay, this last card, I've got the diagonal strip across the bottom with some stitching, and I've stamped the story, but what I really want to do is add one of these little trees at the top there, but I want to make it gold. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that. So I'll just clear up my space here and I'll get started. Back in a moment. Okay, so I've got my Versamark ink pad, a pair of tweezers, and I'm using some Ranger gold tinsel embossing powder for this, and I've got my heat gun here ready as well. So what I'm going to do is just coat the front of this little teeny tiny piece with the Versamark ink. So I'm just pressing that into the ink pad to make sure I get a nice coverage. Then I'm just going to place it on my paper and tip the embossing powder over the top. Then I'll use my tweezers just to fish that out of there. Now this is where it becomes important to have tweezers, because I'm going to use that to tip the excess off, and I'll be able to hold on to that now using my tweezers so that I don't burn my fingers while I'm using my heat gun. So I'll hopefully be able to get this to focus for you as I turn this into glittery gold. So I've just got my heat gun there, and just try to get that to focus. Okay, hopefully you'll be able to see that change, and it's happening pretty quickly. You can see that there, nice and shiny. Alright, just make sure I do get it all melted properly. And that's looking good. See if I can get it to focus there for you. A little bit tricky because it's such a tiny, oh there we go, such a tiny little piece. It's so pretty, nice and glittery. Okay, so that's now ready to add to my page. So I'll just tip that embossing powder back into my jar. I always use a piece of paper folded in half. It's just so easy to get your powder back in there. So simply tap that back in, pop the lid on so I don't spill it everywhere, and then I can add that to that last little card. So I'm just going to use a bit of glue on the back of that. So I'll just grab that one, a little bit of liquid glue, and there we go. And now that can go onto my card. And that's all done. So there you go. All finished. A cute little Christmas tree. Okay, I'll be back in a moment to show you the second set that I've created. Okay, so this is the second set that I've made. Apologise for my birds in the background there, they're making a racket. Okay, so this set I've done in green and gold with the white, and it is using the same stamp set, the Joy stamp set from Felicity Jane. So for each of these cards I've done something a little different. This first one I've used some green ink to stamp the tree. Then I've stamped up the most wonderful time of the year sentiment underneath, and I've embossed that with gold. And I've used the Ranger Princess Gold embossing powder for this set of cards. And again, I've done the same thing with a little wooden star on top there. I've embossed that with the gold. And then I used the tiny little dots stamp that you can see there to stamp the little baubles on the trees, and then I've embossed those in gold as well. So I stamped the tree first in the green, then I used my Versamark ink pad and the embossing powder to make the little baubles. So I did each little set of 3 at a time so that I could see where the baubles were before I stamped the next lot. And to finish this card I just stitched a border around the edge. So that's that first card. This next card also has a stitched border, but this time I've used a mix of the word stamps from the stamp set. So I've got Joy, Sparkle, Twinkle, Be Merry, and I've added another one of those little gold embossed stars on top, so it's kind of in the shape of a little Christmas tree. This next card is very simple. It just says the story. It's got the story stamp, and another little gold embossed star under that, and all my journaling will be added to the rest of that card when I'm ready to use it. I'll skip this one for now because I'm going to add another word to that, but this last card, again I've used the tree stamp. I've done the same technique of adding the little gold baubles to this one and another little gold embossed wooden star. The sentiment at the top there is Christmas cheer, which I've embossed in that same gold, and I've just run a little line of stitching underneath that just for a little bit of added texture. Now this last card, sorry, I almost dropped it there. I used this little star stamp. It's like a little starburst. So I used that on some scrap paper with the gold embossing powder, and then I've just cut a strip to put across the bottom of this card with a little bit of zigzag stitching. I've stamped Be Merry at the top with my green ink, and I'm going to finish this off by adding another little sentiment underneath, and I'm going to emboss that in gold. So I'll do that now and just give you a little quick tutorial on how to do that in case you haven't had the chance to play with the embossing powder. Very similar to the little embossed tree that I did earlier, but this time it's with a stamped word. So I'll get organised and be back in a minute. Okay, so I've got my card ready, and before I use my embossing powder on this, I'm going to use my little powder pillow just to run over the cardstock, and that just helps to get rid of all the excess embossing powder when you tip it off so that it doesn't stick to your paper where you don't want it to go. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm simply going to ink my stamp up with the Versamark, and I'm using the Making Memories sentiment here out of the stamp set, and I'm just going to stamp it underneath those words I've already got on there, like so. Now you can't see it because it is Versamark ink, but once I tip this over the top, you'll be able to see what I've got there. So there we go. It's all stamped there. So I've stamped with the Versamark ink, and now the embossing powder is stuck to that, and I'll use my heat gun to melt it and make it all metallic. So hopefully you'll be able to see the changes that happens here, but we'll see. It's a little bit tricky to film. Just take a couple of seconds. Here we go. Might be able to see that. Okay, so that is looking good. So you can see there now, got that nice metallic making memories underneath. And that finishes off this card. Alright, so thank you for joining me today. I hope you've picked up a couple of little tips for using your embossing powders with your stamps. It's always fun to play around with embossing powder and just add that little bit of extra sparkle to your page. And I'll leave you with some close-up photos at the end as always. And I'll be back again soon with something else to share. So thanks for joining me and bye for now.